Considering how popular Dusk is and how many first-person shooters I've reviewed on this channel already, you might expect that Dusk would be the first David Szymanski game I'd review, but it looks like Chop Goblins is going to get there first. David was kind enough to send me a code for it, so I had to oblige his generosity with a review. I had high hopes going in based on how Kirk Collects and others had hyped it up, but does the game turn out to be all it's hacked up to be, or is it best put on the chopping block? Let's get stuck in like a goblin cleaver and find out. So what is Chop Goblins? Well, it's what Szymanski himself called a microshooter, an intentionally short and sweet experience designed to be played in one sitting when you're just looking to relax and have a predictably good time. The setup itself is pretty simple and presented to you via text screen like any good retro-inspired shooter would. It's 1984, the year of Orwell, for no other discernible reason than because
implications.
On this fateful day, you whimsically decide to break in and steal from your local museum. You know, some of us when we're bored will go see a movie, some of us will break in and steal priceless artifacts. You know, to each their own.
Anyway.
Once inside, your curiosity gets the better of you as you open up a suspicious-looking box and unwittingly unleash the titular Chop Goblins, who apparently are going to mess the world up now that they're free. You immediately give chase, and thus our game begins. The first thing I noticed was how groovy the soundtrack is, at least at first. The main theme is a very fun, Addams Family, spooky, scary skeletons kind of deal, and the core idea of the tracks like these are catchy as hell, but I do wish they didn't repeat the same musical phrases so often. In a game this short, that's not really what you want from your soundtrack, but at least the core ideas are very pleasant to listen to. The sound in general is actually pretty amazing, and much of the combat's personality comes from the goblins' continual call-outs like, "Nice to meet you," or their startled whoops and hollers when they see you or throw their axes at you. The weapon sound design is absolutely delicious as well, and we'll touch more on that later.
That's what she said.
The goblins are pretty gnarly looking and definitely won't win any cuteness awards, although the little old lady gobos crack me up with their nightgowns and hairdos. The game's look is very clean without too many clear visual references that you'd attribute to other games, and yet it's never quite generic, as there's just enough environmental contrast and gradients in colors and mood lighting. It's subtle, clever stuff, and a testament to David Szymanski's talents. Overall, in terms of stuff I've reviewed on the channel, the game feels the most like the similarly upbeat Fateless, except Chop Goblins is actually good. Fateless is amateur at best, but the story behind its creator is pretty interesting, so go check out that video I did when you get a chance.
Anyway.
Back to Chop Goblins, let's check out the level design. They're constructed like your classic FPS maps, in that they're themed spaces going from a museum to city streets and all the way to Dracula's castle in Greece itself. They're mostly linear with some hidey holes and secrets throughout, as you might expect. Our first level, the museum, feels more like a warehouse and is fairly simple in construction, just a couple floors, kind of going up and down staircases shooting goblins. It takes a minute to really feel like a museum, especially since there aren't any exhibits to interact with or anything really bringing out the personality of the place. That being said, you'll be more hard-pressed to figure out the aiming and dodging the goblins' throwing axes than sightseeing. You'll also want to pick up goblin coins lying around the levels for high scores if you're into that, or just breaking all the crates with your pretty powerful knife to see what ammo lies inside. If the game didn't up the stakes so much in subsequent levels, your knife could actually probably carry you through the game as it's pretty powerful. I anticipate some knife-only runs from some utter madmen. The flintlock pistol you pick up will keep you at the required distance to not acquire a hatchet haircut, and it sounds glorious as well. Aiming's a little wonky, and I felt like I had to stop and pop and risk getting chopped far too often, which is a weird problem to have on PC with a mouse. Playing with a keyboard was just as awkward, I found, the aiming feeling too sensitive or not sensitive enough, and the aiming reticle being super small. I was often taking at least an axe or two trying to sit still and set up an accurate shot while the gobos skittered around like little sugar high children. Skill issue? Well, maybe, but I've yet to have this problem with any other shooter. All that to say, the game doesn't make the strongest first impression, but the pistol and the music sound quite nice, and the good news is that the best is yet to come. After escaping the museum, you'll make your way to the streets. Now this level is nothing to write home about visually, but it does bring to the forefront one of the game's favorite little gimmicks: explosive barrels and cars. Just kite around till you've drawn a crowd around a red barrel or a car, shoot the damn thing, and boom shakalaka. you've got yourself a bowl or 12 of goblin gumbo. Delicious. This level's got a ton of interaction points like this, and the most secrets of any level as far as my tiny little brain could remember, standing out as one of the best designed levels despite its somewhat pedestrian setting. You'll also get the riot gun here, which will feel stiff, but appreciably so in that it doesn't wave all around like the other weapons tend to. This one isn't too bad, though it's a little finicky at range, as anything but an exact middle of the head shot will often leave even the weakest enemies still alive. Next up is probably my favorite level, Dracula's Manor. You'll immediately pick up a stake gun called Vlad the Impaler that'll remind you of Quake's nail gun. This thing is divine, although ammo's not crazy prolific for it. The level itself is kooky and spooky, from the soundtrack's eerie whine to the candlelit hallways, which often hide a new enemy type that looks like the hateful love child of a pit bull and a goldfish. These dog things will really mess you up, and they'll test your reflexes more than any other foe has. The level ends with the only boss fight of the game, though it's at least memorable as Dracula sings a rather literate and specific song to you the entire time. I'd be interested to see just how many voice lines he had recorded, because I killed him before he ran out, although I don't know how you'd last long enough in this tough kind of fight for him to get all the way through his voice lines. Oh well, stop attacking me and that'd solve both our problems, Vlad. I guess there's a reason your name isn't Chad the Impaler. You suck! Alright, well once you've exterminated Dracula, you'll be warped to Greece, where you are just sure that the goblin's next course of action will be to nab the staff of the Corinthians. Whatever that is. I mean, your guess is as good as mine, homie, but we'll find out soon. This one feels the most like a Serious Sam level to me, a wide daytime area where you're besieged by a ton of guys. You know, like an arena shooter, but a real one. It's also the only level that really has any dexterity challenges, as there are some jump pads and such. Nothing special here, but kind of a nice change of pace that makes it not just feel like an ode to a Grecian urn. Torches gild the hallways and offer up a pleasant, subtle color contrast as you venture deeper into the temple and get to see this nice interplay between the bright red lava and the dark interior walls. The music is upbeat and adventuresome, and there's this pleasant vibe throughout the whole thing. Here's where you also get the game's most powerful weapon before the Chop Goblins do, the Staff of the Corinthians. This thing is the game's BFG, churning anything within its whip-like range into glorious giblets. While not a ton about Chop Goblins really turned me on something fierce, the staff is one of my favorite power weapons I think I've ever picked up in a game, and a real reason to play this one. And this isn't even the level that shows it off the best. Things about to get real serious in the future. The Grecian campaign foiled, you somehow warp to an alternate timeline where the goblins have actually already won, in the Gobbo capital of Choppin. Before I looked back at my footage to remember where exactly this level was located, I was just going to say how its opening courtyard area reminded me of Stalker, and I guess that was the intent, as the Choppin name and look has a distinctly Eastern Bloc influence. Guess this David Szymanski guy knows how to sell a vibe or something.
You don't say!
Oh, and speaking of that courtyard, this is one of my favorite areas visually, with its rich shadows, nice color contrast, and cool light-up Chop Goblin throwing implements. But it's also one of the most annoying because the goblins themselves are almost the exact same color as various parts of the environment, and it was easy to lose track of them constantly in the low-hanging foliage. And because of this low visibility, the glow of the axes they carry doesn't actually help you know much about what they're about to do next, whether they're alternating them back and forth to run, or whether they're in the process of throwing them at you. And once you descend into the bowels of Choppin with its glowing blood dragon-esque interiors, you'll be hard-pressed to not get equally smashed by the hordes of guys down here, too. Now, because I'm a neurotic weirdo who tends to save everything powerful to the very last moment I need it, so I'm never out of luck in a tough fight, I kept hoarding the staff ammo, not realizing this level is meant to be like Half-Life 2's ending, where you just basically go ham with the power weapon. Staff ammo litters the ground here and is meant to be used pretty aggressively on the hordes that you find, though of course you'll need to try and aggro them into more convenient clusters so that the staff takes out the most gobbos as possible with each blast. Realizing that this wasn't meant to be a truly testing final fight and more of a victory lap with the staff helped take my experience from fairly frustrating to finally freeing. Though I must say I'm fairly disappointed that there wasn't any final boss fight against, a giant robot or gobbot or something futuristic. You'll get a couple tough rooms of the big bruiser type goblins that throw multiple axes at you and take quite a beating to take down, but you just end up basically shooting a piece of the environment, the facility blows up, and the game ends abruptly. Now, I spoil all of this because I don't want you to expect anything awesome at the end, and then have the wind go out of your sails as you realize the game just ended and nothing happened. I mean, overall, I mostly enjoyed my time with Chop Goblins, but I can't say I was blown away by it. Now, let me preface any ensuing negative criticism by acknowledging that yes, this is a budget title meant to be treated as such, so any criticisms of scale aren't meant to be intentionally out of touch, only to suggest that having a more momentous ending would make repeat playthroughs a lot easier to enjoy since you've got something conclusive and epic to look forward to. It's just a simple matter of lacking the crescendo that you might expect from certain first-person shooters that would just feel better to me personally as a player, though I can obviously understand that it might be more trouble than it's worth from the viewpoint of a developer. There's certainly some replay value here though, as the MVP of game longevity, New Game Plus, is here, as is a level select for curated replays. Now, I tried playing on the hardest difficulty on New Game Plus, and didn't get as much out of it as I thought I would, as it's mostly just easier to get killed from afar while you're trying to line up the kind of janky aiming, but the option's there if you want it. But while the game's look and vibe are cute and vibrant, I never ended up quite buying into the central gameplay loop. The guns sound great, and the staff is one of my favorite power weapons because of the satisfying giblets it creates, but trying to aim and dodge throwing axes simultaneously never quite felt right, and it ended up feeling like, regardless of mouse or controller, I was still having to sit still like a turret to get a bead on the hyperactive enemies, and then I was just getting hit, which undoes the momentum of combat that Szymanski seems to be pushing for. That said, the long hallways of some of the museum levels are a good example of when the game feels a little bit more right and balanced to me, while you're still having to dodge projectiles but aren't just eating them constantly to set up good shots. What's kind of funny is that the knife is so powerful it could probably carry you through the game, as I mentioned earlier, so it almost makes you wonder if the game sort of secretly wants you to knife guys more often than not, as opposed to sitting back trying to trade pot shots with each other. The reason being is that it's nearly impossible to hit them at close range with your guns, so something to think about. But whether or not these gameplay quirks bother you or not, do be aware that Chop Goblins, while only $5 or $6 USD, is a pretty short game, clocking in at just over an hour for me on my first playthrough on the second hardest difficulty. But it is full of vibrant, fun energy, and that's not something a whole lot of games pull off without trying too hard to be quirky. David Szymanski is just a solid developer who probably could make a crap game if he tried, so if your interest has been piqued here today, you really can't go too wrong with the game, even with the precautions I mentioned. Hopefully you'll have a good time whacking some Chop Goblins. So thanks again to David Szymanski for the review code, and I promise I won't put off playing his myriad of small indie projects or Dusk for much longer. The game just looks way too good, and I can only savor the anticipation for so long. Peace out. And before we go, I'd like to shout out my patrons: Dead Forge, Mark Neubauer, Shantiva, and Hey Blondie. If you'd like to join their ranks, jump over to my Patreon at the link below. $3, $5, and $10 tier. $3 tier gets your name at the end of the videos. The $5 tier gets you that same privilege with the added ability to listen to extra podcast episodes where me and other gamers, even other YouTubers, discuss things that just work better in open format, and also the ability to ask questions that can be answered at the end of every video. So have fun with that. The $10 tier is more of a gratuity kind of tier. It's sort of if you really want to, but certainly open to suggestions to make that tier more interesting and attractive if that is indeed something that you would like to do. We've got some shorter indie horror games coming up, and we might even take a gander at some Signalis, some Outlast, maybe some Myst. And with that, I will leave you. Peace.